May 2020, Pella, Iowa. A woman is found savagely murdered in her vehicle.
She had a horrific injury to her hand. It almost took her thumb off.
Her name is Tracy Mondabaugh, and police suspect the ex-wife of Tracy's current boyfriend. Her name is Michelle Boat.
She unleashed hell on Tracy that day. She was just not able to deal with her marriage falling apart.
I think in her head, she felt that if she removed Tracy from the situation, that Nick would come back to her.
It doesn't take police long to find out just what their suspect has been up to.
Michelle had been following Tracy around town for quite a while that evening. She stalked Tracy and then killed her.
And Michelle's own words provide damning evidence.
And tell the she messed with the wrong mama.
Every one of the things that she did was a free will choice, to the point that she plunged a knife into Tracy's heart.
This is the story of Tracy Mondabaugh's murder and how it was solved. The story of a determined killer driven by rage and by jealousy. May 18th, 2020. Police in the city of Pella, Iowa, receive a call about a possible domestic dispute.
Pella Police Department.
Yeah, I live over at 21 Glenwood. I just went outside to smoke a cigarette, and what looked like a scuffle between a couple. Well, when I saw her get out of the truck, her face is just all bloody.
Do you have any idea what apartment she might have went in?
No, she looked like she just got in the car and left. Looked like a Cadillac, almost cream or light-colored off-white.
She witnessed what she thought was a domestic incident, and a couple people arguing in the parking lot, and then when one of the people came around the corner, the witness said that she was covered in blood. And so that obviously was very alarming.
Shortly afterwards, police arrive on the scene.
Pella Department ambulance. I got someone that's laying in the driver's seat of the pickup. Doesn't look like they're responding. Lots of blood. Bleeding from the hand. Really large open wound. Ma'am, are you awake? Hello?
They found a body. They didn't know exactly how long it had been there, the extent of the injuries, and so they attempted to perform CPR. It was unsuccessful.
You start to look at the area around her body, and you could see that there was a struggle. Her purse had been knocked out. Some of her personal items, her teeth, she wore dentures, were on the ground as well. And then you could barely see into the cab of the truck, but you could see immediately that there was a tremendous amount of blood.
Using her driver's license, police are able to identify the victim as Tracy Mondabaugh. Police are soon able to find out more about Tracy.
This whole thing was a tragedy. She had people that loved her and for the most part have been living her life, well.
Her children described her as a very loving mother and a very nice person, just kind of trying to figure out her way through life.
Tracy had been dating Nick Boat. He is separated from his wife of over 20 years and works at a local industrial and agricultural supplier, Vermeer Corporation.
Her family was happy that she had met Nick and that Nick treated their mom well.
He had begun seeing this woman while married to Michelle Boat, and at some point he told Michelle that he was leaving her to go live with Tracy.
I believe he described it as the love of his life. and that he now, for the first time in his life, knew what love really was.
So Tracy and Nick moved in together, and the truck was Nick Boat's truck. Tracy had dropped Nick off for work, had the vehicle that day, took him lunch from Burger King, and had come back to their apartment after dropping off and having some lunch with him.
This was the last time Tracy was seen alive. Crime scene investigators begin to examine the scene and look for evidence.
Well, first and foremost, when law enforcement arrived and the Pella Police Department were wearing body cameras, you could tell that the victim was still seatbelted in. That was important, at least from my perspective, because it demonstrated an ambush attack.
It is also clear that there has been a violent struggle.
You can tell Tracy fought back. She had a horrific injury to her hand. It almost took her thumb off.
She had what many people refer to as defensive wounds on her hands, and then she had a single stab wound to her chest.
According to our medical examiner, that puncture of her heart terminated her heart from beating, and so it was just mere seconds, I think. Probably less than 30 seconds, and I hope for Tracy's sake it was shorter than that.
One small but vital clue catches the attention of the police.
At the crime scene, they had found what looked like a finger off of a blue latex glove. Just the finger looked like it had been ripped off of the glove.
Everyone, whether or not it's law enforcement or the EMT crews, firefighters, they wear purple gloves. So the fact that we had a blue glove at the scene, this stood out to us.
Investigators also learned something of enormous interest from some bystanders.
There was a male and a female standing outside, and he told me that a lighter colored, he couldn't remember, silver or white vehicle with a Vermeer sticker in the front windshield had left the scene before the officers arrived.
Through his dealings with Nick and Michelle, Lieutenant Cox immediately put it together that that was Michelle Boat's Cadillac, which was a critical blessing that Lieutenant Cox was able to put that all together very quickly.
Armed with this information, investigators are now able to track down Michelle Boat and pay her a visit.
She lives probably less than 1.5 miles from the crime scene. When they knocked on the door, not a whole lot happened initially because she didn't answer the door. I think by the body footage we were able to calculate that it's about a 5-minute knocking, pounding on the door, pounding on the side of the house.
You could see inside the residence. The blinds weren't pulled on the windows. They were wide open. Lieutenant Bigowet went to the driveway and was looking around the Cadillac. He put his hand up to the wheel of the front wheel of the car and said that the brake rotors were still warm. He could feel the heat coming off the rotors, which would tell me that the vehicle's been driven fairly recently.
Find a phone number for Michelle Boat and call her and see if you can get her to answer. The rotors on the Cadillac are still hot, but nobody's coming to the door. I can see through most of the house and don't see anybody.
So I went around the side of the house and I noticed that there was a light on I didn't know what the room was. I thought maybe it was a bathroom. So I pounded on the side of the house, on the siding of the house.
I think she's in this bathroom back here. I can see a little bit of movement, but I can't. The blinds are pulled.
About 30 seconds after that, Lieutenant Bigowet yelled for me and said that she was coming to the door. So I went to the front porch of the residence.
83, I just confirmed with Marion County, they have the same number.
Yes, I was in the shower. What do you need?
Police have caught up with Michelle Boat. She appears calm and collected. They know they need to find out if she's connected with the murder of Tracy Mondabaugh. In Pella, Iowa, police have begun an investigation into the brutal murder of 47-year-old Tracy Mondabaugh. The main person of interest in the investigation is Michelle Boat, whose silver Cadillac was seen leaving the scene of the crime. Police have arrived at Michelle's home and after some time, she's finally opened the door.
Same number.
Yes, I was in the shower. What do you need?
She opened the door and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I asked her if she could step out first, and then I changed my mind because she was in a robe and all that. I asked her if she minded if we stepped inside the residence.
She claims to not know why they're there. She was just taking a shower. Ultimately, officers go inside and speak with Michelle, and she told them that she didn't know anything about what had happened to Tracy.
They knew differently. They knew that her car was seen leaving the scene. Additionally, Deputy Bigowit goes and looks at the vehicle. There's blood on the outside of the vehicle, and the brakes on the vehicle are still warm. So we knew her story, what she was telling us, didn't match the physical evidence at the scene.
Police moved to secure Michelle Boat's residence.
They were obviously very concerned about maintaining anything of evidentiary value because, at this point, it's really looking like Michelle Boat is a person who might have been responsible for Tracy's death.
I went into the basement first, and there was a storage area, pretty decent sized storage area in the basement of the house. And that was where I heard something. I couldn't see much. It was pretty dark. I had my flashlight, and I couldn't find a light switch.
And you got to imagine, if you're an officer going down there, you don't know exactly what's going on. You're walking into pitch black. He actually hears the machine going, and it somewhat startles him.
I heard some movement back in the darkness, and I just announced police department, if you're back there, come out. And nobody came out, so I continued forward and realized that the sound I was hearing was the washing machine.
But the contents of the machine proved to be of interest.
There's just one outfit in the washing machine, which is a little peculiar. Nobody usually washes just one pair of pants and one shirt or whatever. So he noticed that, and that ended up being a crucial piece of evidence.
Police believe they have enough to warrant them taking Michelle into custody.
Michelle Boat was in custody within 20 minutes. There wasn't the concern that we have a killer on the loose or that this was a random act of violence.
We decided to arrest Michelle Boat on a violation of a no contact order that night, and that was brought on by, I went to Vermeer Corporation and requested to look at their security footage. When I was reviewing that, I found video of Michelle Boat's silver Cadillac following the red F-150 that Tracy was driving. The video shows Michelle sitting in the same parking lot as the victim and Nick and watching them for about a half an hour. And then once the truck leaves, Michelle pulls out and follows the truck. Shortly thereafter, we got the phone call at the police department of the situation that was going on. That was when we started putting together that this is first-degree murder because she had this planned out. She stalked Tracy and then killed her.
The investigators now call in the Division of Criminal Investigations, known as the DCI.
Certain law enforcement agencies, and especially in smaller communities, don't have access to all of the things that DCI does. And so when we're able to make a phone call to them when something like this happens, we inherit a wealth of resources for the investigation.
Just knowing that people that deal with these types of situations on a more regular basis are able to come and back us up on a case like this is a huge relief when you're in the middle of this situation and wondering what the next step is.
When I arrived at the Pella Police Department, I already knew that we had 2 crime scenes at that time. Several search warrants were already underway, and Michelle Boat was already at the police department.
It is time to question Michelle in depth.
Michelle maintained that she didn't have anything to do with the injuries that Tracy had to her chest or her hands. She claimed not to have seen Tracy that evening. Michelle maintained that she had just gone out to get some food, realized that the line was too long at the burger place, and turned around and came home. But that she had nothing to do with the the murder at all or anything that happened to Tracy.
To the police, Michelle Boat's reactions are more than strange.
When ultimately law enforcement tells her that Tracy has been hurt severely and Tracy is dead, Michelle gets this eerie smile on her face. And she looks at him and goes, "Oh, I guess the Lord works in mysterious ways." And to me, that was such a telling comment.
It was incredibly chilling. That statement just showed to me a complete lack of remorse for what had happened. That in some ways, I think, was her saying that, that she was somehow justified in what she did because this woman had interfered with her husband.
As a prosecutor, I immediately thought that's something we're going to use at trial. As a human being, I thought, wow, that's really this woman's mindset.
Police are also uncovering more about Michelle and her life.
She was kind of a normal person, best we could tell. She had worked, she lived in Pella, she didn't get arrested until the times leading up to this.
She never stood out to me as somebody who would go this far. In my dealings with her, she was always she was loud. She was a yelling at the top of her lungs type of person.
Something happened with her that drove her to a really dark place, and that she was just not able to deal with her marriage falling apart.
Michelle and Nick had been married for 20 years.
It was a loveless marriage for probably more than a decade, and had turned south in a hurry. He had told her that he wanted out of the relationship, that their marriage was over, and he, in fact, moved out of the home. And at that point, he said she became very angry with him.
She was so used to Nick doing whatever she said that when Nick finally left and found somebody else that made him happy, it was more than she could handle.
She largely had no criminal history, but then in the months leading up to the murder had kind of started popping up on Pella Police Department's radar. She assaulted Nick at one point, which resulted in a protective order being in place, and then Michelle continued to violate that protective order.
I think for 50-some years she was just an ordinary person. But there was certainly something lingering inside her that caused her to, and I'm not even going to say snap, because I don't think she snapped. I think she did exactly what she wanted to do. She absolutely had the personality of a sociopath who was driven and wasn't going to stop until she achieved her goal. And that was the death of Tracy Mondabaugh.
Investigators now have their prime suspect in custody. As they put their case together, Michelle's motive starts to become clear: jealousy. In May 2020, in Pella, Iowa, detectives are learning more and more about the events surrounding the murder of 47-year-old Tracy Mondabaugh. They have Michelle Boat, the estranged wife of Tracy's boyfriend Nick, in custody. Pella police have called in the Division of Criminal Investigations, and Agent Elizabeth Miller is now at the center of the inquiry.
One of the first things that Special Agent Miller did was recognize that she wanted to get photographs of Michelle Boat's body. And so we photographed Michelle Boat head to toe. And at first, there was a slight wound to one of her fingers, a laceration, but barely visible to the human eye, and a little bit of discoloration. And she had a small laceration on her face, but literally that was it. It was not anything that would lead you to believe this person was just involved in a violent attack.
But there is more to come from the examination of Michelle.
About 36 hours later, on May 20th, is when I took the second set of photographs. At this point, you could see a large bruise on her upper arm, and just more injuries were apparent than they were the day before. Bruises can take a little while to show up. So when I don't see an injury from the first set of photographs, and then the second time that you go and document someone's body, and there's a whole set of injuries, it says that there was an altercation.
Police seek permission to conduct a search of Michelle's home.
A team of law enforcement go in the house and searched it thoroughly. Obviously we were looking for a knife or some kind of sharp object because we were thinking that may have caused the death. Obviously we didn't know for sure at that point, but anything with blood on it or hair.
A calendar in the house tells its own story.
Tracy was documenting the amount of days that Nick had left her. It went from 1 day's gone to 69 days gone. She was definitely keeping track of how long he had left.
The examiners make an extraordinary discovery on Michelle's vehicle.
One of the things that was unusual, when we look at the vehicle that Michelle Boat was driving, attached to the windshield wiper was a black choker necklace. And inside that choker, or weave through it, is Tracy Mondaball's hair. So during this struggle, somehow, Michelle Boat must grab at Tracy's neck, pulls the necklace and tosses it. And for whatever reason, and I'm glad it happened, it attached by the magnet that held it together to her windshield wiper and made it all the way home, still attached.
It just all fit what exactly had happened. That there was obviously a violent struggle, and Michelle at some point threw the necklace towards her car.
And there is more in the car which supports the investigators' developing case against Michelle Boat.
There were several pieces of evidence which suggested that Michelle Boat didn't just decide in some moment of rage that she was going to kill Tracy. I mean, first of all, she had everything that she needed for murder in her car. Rubber gloves, binoculars, there's a few other things in there that clearly showed that Michelle Boat was thinking about doing something bad.
But police are about to find the most damning piece of evidence.
Lieutenant Bigwit noticed that when they were in the bathroom that the toilet kept running. That caught his attention, and I believe he lifted the top of the tank, saw something in there. It was a towel with a set of rubber gloves with one fingertip missing. I went to the crime lab straight away from the scene, and then just like the rubber glove tip from near where Tracy Mondabaugh's body was found, those were taken to the lab too and matched. And you don't need a medical degree to look at the rubber glove and see that it fit the tip that was found at the scene.
That absolutely connected the crime scene with Michelle Boat's residence. It was a perfect fracture match for the tip of the latex glove at the crime scene and the glove found in the toilet tank at Michelle's residence.
Police are still searching, however, for one elusive piece of evidence, the murder weapon.
We walked for miles around this town. We worked long and hard trying to find that weapon and were never able to. We did take some knives from the residence that could have been in there. I'm not sure, but I would like to know where the knife was.
The investigating team dig deeper, and they find out much more about Michelle and her motivation.
There was quite a bit of digital evidence. Michelle Boat was convinced that Tracy Mondabaugh was the source of all of her marital problems. I think that she had worked herself into some view of what was going on, that if Tracy were gone, that her life would be normal again. I think in many ways, Michelle Boat believed that she was the victim in this circumstance, that someone had come and taken her husband, and she was not going to allow that to happen.
Michelle somehow found Tracy's ex-boyfriend on Facebook and sent him a message saying, hey, you should go get your girlfriend back. She's with my husband, and if you go get Tracy back, then I'll get Nick back. I think in her head, she felt that if she removed Tracy from the situation, that Nick would come back to her.
Even her phone calls from jail, when she originally gets arrested, she's totally confused by why Nick hasn't visited her at jail, because Tracy's gone now. Where else would he go? Of course he would come back to her.
Michelle's stalking had become an obsession.
There was evidence that Michelle had been trying to track Tracy down. She followed Tracy one time to Ottumwa, and the police had to be called down there. So it was clear that Michelle was interested in knowing where Tracy was, and she was clearly filled with rage towards Tracy.
When you lose your identity and potentially lose a major source of your income, you feel helpless and discarded, and everything you've built your whole life around is gone. And so that's her rage. She couldn't let it go.
When voice messages from Michelle to Nick surface, it's clear that Michelle's intense rage had reached a dangerous level, and that her behavior had become unpredictable.
You know, ignoring me isn't going to do you any good. Because sooner or later, I'm going to find her, and I'm going to kill her. And then you're going to feel the pain that I feel right now. Being over after 20 years of marriage. Well, a woman scorned.
They were awful. Michelle had left, I think it was something in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 voicemail messages, and Nick had chosen to save them.
They were from weeks earlier, all explaining that how upset Michelle was about Nick leaving and dating Tracy, talking about Tracy in a derogatory way, and quite frankly, laying out her plan, and that was to harm Tracy.
I don't think you have any idea what I'm capable of. And neither does she. Because she's going to die. One way or another. I'll kill her. It might take me a little while. I'll do it.
You know, these messages sometimes are just 15 seconds of screaming. Sometimes she's played songs. And sometimes she's talking. And when she's talking, the voice messages made everyone in our office, the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
I can't wait till I find her. Oh, man, she's going to pay.
It's not just the words, it's the tone, the hate, the anger is palpable, and it's chilling.
The motivation was clear, and that was that she definitely wanted to harm Tracy and, do serious harm to her.
Oh, and tell the that you're sleeping with, she messed with the wrong mama.
Police have their killer. Now they need to piece together the events that led to the jealousy-motivated murder of Tracy Mondabaugh. Police in Iowa are continuing their investigation into the murder of 47-year-old Tracy Mondabaugh. They've arrested Michelle Boat, the estranged wife of Tracy's boyfriend Nick. Now they're trying to piece together Michelle's movements on the day of the killing.
She maintained she had left to go get dinner, and then when she got to the drive-thru at the Culver's, the line was too long, so she drove back home. The problem was she was missing about an hour from her timeline. her story just didn't make sense.
I believe that Michelle Boat had decided she was going to kill Tracy. She didn't know exactly when or where, but it was something that had been growing in her mind over the course of those 69 days since Nick left, and especially since the time that she realized that Tracy was part of the equation. And so I think probably that evening she did go to try to get something to eat, and she noticed the truck, she saw who was driving it, and I think at that point she just realized, this is my chance.
The CCTV footage which police recover becomes key to progressing the investigation.
We ended up through investigation finding that Michelle had been following Tracy around town for quite a while that evening. It started at Burger King.
Tracy pulls into the Burger King drive-thru at 7:20 p.m.
Michelle followed Tracy to the Burger King and parked in the parking lot of the strip mall a ways away so Tracy would not have noticed her. You can see her on surveillance footage from the Burger King and from the Culver's surveillance footage get out of her car and then go to the trunk compartment.
Michelle Boat had, as we called it, kind of a murder kit. She had rubber gloves, she had a hammer, she clearly had a knife, she had a crowbar. She had all of those things with her in that vehicle. I think some of those things were located in the trunk of her vehicle. That's why, while she was waiting for Michelle, she got ready, she armed herself, she prepared. She followed her.
The next stop is the Vermeer facility where Nick works.
You first see Tracy pull in to Vermeer, and then less than 40 seconds later, Michelle Boat pulls in.
What we see is Tracy pulling into the parking lot, driving the truck she was found in, and meeting Nick. And Michelle pulls in sort of behind them. Our theory was she was trying not to be detected by Nick and Tracy. Michelle was sitting there watching them the whole time. She waited a half an hour and watched them eat dinner. He kissed Tracy goodbye, and they parted ways, and that was the last time that he ever saw her.
That's what fueled this whole thing, is the realization that this is really over. In that moment when she realized it was really over, having seen them in that parking lot and having a passionate kiss that Michelle hadn't had from him in years, and that was the kindling that lit the fire.
The vehicles leave, and once again, Tracy's vehicle pulls out of Vermeer. Michelle is following, and then just down the road, probably half a mile or so away, there's security cameras on the backside of a church that identify both vehicles driving away.
Tragically, police believe that the final stop is murder.
From all the evidence, it appears that Tracy Mondabaugh pulls into the parking spot, turns the car off, but before she unhooks her seatbelt, she's attacked. At that point, we believe that Michelle Boat, clearly wearing gloves and armed with a knife, attacks, and at that point, that's when the eyewitness and what I call kind of the sound witness hears what's going on.
Tracy was found still wearing her seatbelt, and that to me was one of the most critical pieces of evidence because it was very telling about what had happened. Knowing that Michelle Boat was still in her seatbelt told me something I think that was critical, and that was that this was all one altercation, that there was no break in the fight, that likely when Michelle Boat approached Tracy that she had a knife with her, that she didn't leave to go get the knife or leave to put rubber gloves on, that she approached with the knife, and I think that really said a lot about her intent, what she meant to do when she got there.
DNA evidence allows investigators to connect all the dots.
We were able to use DNA to tie the two separate areas of town together through the DNA from the crime scene to Michelle Boat's residence and back.
That's what linked her to the scene. There weren't any eyewitnesses that could tell who she was. So yes, the DNA was very important to that aspect.
Michelle Boat's vehicle had a piece of jewelry with magnets on it. It was like a choker, and that had black hair that came back as Tracy Mondabaugh's DNA on that hair. There were blood splatters all over the side of the Cadillac and in multiple different areas around the car that all came back as Tracy Mondabaugh's DNA.
The rubber glove was found wrapped up in a towel in the toilet tank. It did have Tracy's blood DNA on it, and it did match up with the rubber glove tip that was found at the crime scene, which also had Tracy's DNA on it.
Tracy Mondabaugh fought like hell. She had inside her hands Michelle Boat's hair. So her ability to, even in death, be certain that she was going to bring her killer to justice, she fought back, and she fought back in a way that allowed us to use what she found to advance our case.
As police prepare their prosecution for trial, they believe they have a very good case.
Once we saw that she followed Tracy, that and the nature of the attack, the fact that we had a knife used, it was close combat, for lack of a better term, and multiple stabs, because we knew that there was the injury that killed her and the injury to her hand, that in my mind this was murder in the first degree. This was premeditated homicide with malice aforethought. Every one of the things that she did was a free will choice that she made on her own, to the point that she plunged a knife into Tracy's heart.
I'm going to kill her. The that you're sleeping with, she messed with the wrong mama.
All of the evidence that existed in this case, and you didn't have to believe all of it. You could just believe any one of it, and you would find Michelle Boat guilty.
This physical evidence, it eliminates the plausibility of being able to argue that your client wasn't there or that this wasn't them. That was when we knew we had to pursue a manslaughter defense or a lesser included defense.
Given the relationship between the parties involved, the trial was always going to be an emotional one.
She kept it together fairly well. And I'm not going to say she was persuasive, but she was at times sympathetic. I mean, you're married to a person for 20 plus years, and they all of a sudden tell you, somewhat out of the blue, blindsiding you, that they want out of this relationship. And while you still are dealing with the emotions of maybe I can win that person back, you realize they've already moved on to someone else. I think for Michelle, it was just too much, too quick, and she wasn't going to tolerate it.
I think at that point she was still playing a part. When we were testifying, there was not a whole lot of emotion. When she testified or Nick testified, there was a lot of emotion on her part, or what appeared to be emotion.
I think that Michelle did the best she could to try to manipulate the facts into what would help her, but given what I knew about what the evidence was and what she said, they didn't coincide with each other.
The jury reaches a guilty verdict within 45 minutes.
I felt relieved more than anything else, because I think the truth is that Michelle Boat killed Tracy Mondabaugh, and she had planned it, and she meant to do it. And just to finally have the jury say, that's what we think happened too, it was a good feeling.
Having a first-degree murder verdict is always a great form of justice. However, it still took a loss of life to get that verdict.
Sentencing was about 8 weeks later, give or take, and honestly, I think it probably took less than 15 minutes, which was amazing. And Michelle Boat is now going to spend the rest of her natural-born life in prison.
Michelle receives her sentence, but was justice done in this case?
I think justice exists. If it didn't, my job would be meaningless if I didn't find that there was justice in it. But in order to get justice, something bad has to happen.
In a sort of cold way in my job, the file's closed. So there's that, but I bet if you ask that question to Tracy's family or Nick, they probably have a different answer for you. I'm sure they're probably still dealing with a lot.
There's nothing that any of us can do to bring Tracy Mondabaugh back. That's what would be justice, is be able to snap your fingers and all of a sudden bring a person back to life. But to the extent of what we're allowed to do under our criminal justice system, the jury got it right. Michelle Boat's exactly where she deserves to be.
I think Michelle made a choice to take the life of someone she deemed was a threat to her marriage. She did not show any remorse. I don't know if I would say cold-blooded killer, but I don't think that she feels bad about what she did.
It's just a reminder to me that people who are seemingly normal, seemingly, good people, can be capable of really bad things. It's so hard not to just think, what if? What if Michelle just would have taken a second to breathe and turn her car around that day, that Tracy'd still be alive? It's sad to see how all of the circumstances came together for Tracy to lose her life.
The murder of Tracy is a case with jealousy at its heart, solved by a dedicated team.
I would describe this case as good old-fashioned police work. The way that Pella PD was so quick to find Michelle and to take control of that situation.
It just shows that even in a town like Pella, very small compared to a lot of towns and cities, and we don't deal with this very often, but when we do have something like this happen, we're still able to step up and take care of the job.
You don't ever forget the murder cases. You don't forget the big ones. And I think that's absolutely true. I'm going to remember Tracy Mondabaugh for the rest of my life.
June 2011, Pottawatomie County, Iowa. A shooting is reported.
We were told that there had been shots fired and possibly somebody had been shot.
They find Patty on the kitchen floor with pools of blood all around her.
This particular firearm that was used in this incident was a shotgun, so it was actually shotgun shells that were in the residence.
The perpetrator is quickly apprehended, and the motive soon becomes clear.
He went into a jealous rage, but it wasn't the first time.
Whatever measures he needed to take to make sure that he could control her, he was going to do that.
Just the thought, if I can't have her, nobody can have her.
The victim fights bravely for her life, but sadly succumbs to her injuries almost 2 years later.
No likelihood of recovery. She was removed from life support and she died.
We kind of thought that, she had made it that many months, that she was in the clear and could maybe live a healthy life and move on.
This is the story of a relationship racked with jealousy, the tragic death of a mother of 4, and how her killer attempts to evade justice.
It was just the thought that if I can't have you, nobody will have you.
They're shooting. Oh,
okay, sir.
We need to hurry up.
Okay, is anybody injured?
Yes. Okay.
17th of June, 2011. The Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office receives an urgent 911 call.
Okay, stay on the line here with me. What are you hearing, sir? What are you hearing?
I don't hear anything right now. I heard 2 gunshots, but nobody's talking anymore.
The caller is Ben Shimmin. He is with his friend Patty Harker and claims an ex-boyfriend of Patty's called Craig is threatening them with a gun.
Once the 911 call was made, you could immediately hear the screaming, the yelling, mostly Craig and Patty trying to explain. We're just friends. We're just friends. We've been together before. Calm down. And Craig was using profanities, saying, "What the hell are you doing?" So on and so forth.
Deputies are dispatched to the scene, while dispatch keeps talking to the caller.
It's about a 19.5-minute 911 call, and it's interesting to me, I suppose, just professionally, in that there's a lot of very, sort of emotional things going on, and yet the caller, Ben, was locked in a bathroom at the time, and he's pretty calm as he's sort of relaying what's going on.
You know what kind of a gun it was?
First initial call came out. I was acting supervisor that night. We were dispatched, 2 of us were dispatched to domestic disturbance. All they told us that there was possibly 3 individuals involved. It's a high priority call because you don't know exactly what's going to happen, so you want to get there, fairly quick.
Pottawatomie County is almost 1,000 square miles. It's a pretty good-sized county. And so, there may be 3 deputies on patrol in the rural area of the county. So it's not like you just get a 3-minute response. He's somewhere in the eastern side of the county. And so he's actually driving as he has the address he knows he's heading to. We've got his cruiser video. And so he, at one point, actually passes Craig. He actually goes to a farm driveway, turns around, and starts a pursuit.
As I keep getting relayed information as I'm going, I was heading south on 330th. We were told that there had been shots fired and possibly somebody had been shot. The whole call turns into a whole different situation. Shooter or the possible suspect had been left the area in a pickup truck. And it was like shortly after that I noticed headlights coming at me on the road. I have to make a decision whether I'm going to go after the vehicle or not. So I turn around on the vehicle, and then I start to go after it, and then I can't get on the radio. I'm trying to get a hold of the other officers, and they're not answering. I'm trying to relay information of, what the vehicle is, who possibly is in the vehicle, where my other officers are at. There's just a lot going on in a short amount of time. Back then, we didn't have as good a radio system as we have now. I couldn't figure out really where they were at, so I erred on the side of life at the scene and turned around. And I knew I had another officer coming from the north, so I turned around and continued to this scene.
The house is on a rural track with no streetlights.
Actual residence is off of it's called a gravel road. No lights. You only have a few houses around, so you have a little bit of light from houses, but that's about it. We approached the house, and I don't know if it's just with everything that was going on, one of the officers, he was a younger guy at the time, he had already drove up, and his car was there.
Deputies can see a subject inside. It's Ben Shimmin, who called 911.
I wanted him to come outside the house because, I don't know what we're getting involved in. Plus, we have to watch, 360 degrees around us. Finally, I think dispatch talked him into coming to us, and that it was safe to come out of the house. So he comes out of the house, and then, we have to, I told dispatch to have him, put his hands up when he came to the door, and then we would take over with telling him what to do. We put him into one of the patrol vehicles because, still, we don't know at this time how he's involved. And then when we entered, she was laying on the floor in the kitchen area. It appeared that she had a bullet or had been struck in the shoulder. I knew that it was a 12 gauge shotgun that she was shot with. And when you see what that does, you figure you don't have a lot of time, and there's a lot of blood. You got to stop the bleeding. I went out to my vehicle and grabbed my trauma kit, and then we used what we could there, and then I believe we went and got more towels from around the house to try to stuff and stop the bleeding until EMS showed up. I kind of remember, you try to get their name and how old they are and just basic stuff, and more or less it's to let EMS know, so before they get there they know what they're dealing with, and then it's also just to kind of keep their mind off of everything else that's going on, which pretty hard to do that, but you're trying to take their mind off of what's actually going on and get them to talk to you. EMS, I believe, took her straight to Mercy Hospital. After we got investigations showed up, and then myself and other deputies were trying to figure out where Craig Finney, who he was a suspect, where he had gone.
Conscious that this case could go in any direction, Detective Freeberg preserves the scene.
At that time, I had told, when Deputy Doty had cleared the house, I had told them to go grab a camera and just start taking pictures of everything, because you want the pictures obviously before everything gets disrupted, because you're going to have, we had 3 officers in there, and then EMS is going to show up, which they have a job to do. They're not thinking of securing a scene. So it's a lot going on.
Crime scene analyst Katie Patty is one of the first to arrive at the scene.
Most of the time, I don't have a ton of information. Usually, it's kind of an unknown. I know there's been a shooting. I don't know if anyone, the severity of injuries. I don't know where our victim might be, if our suspect's in custody. Typically, by the time that I arrive, the officers will have gathered more information. So that would be the first thing I do when I arrive on a scene, is go to the first responding deputy if they're there, and ask them if I can get some more information as to what's happening, where's our victim, where's our suspect, what are the circumstances here. I had been told that we had a female who resided in that residence who had been shot unknown how many times, and that she was being transferred to Nebraska Medical Center in very critical condition. I also knew at that point then that our suspect was no longer on location, and we didn't know where he was at that time. There was a large pool of blood on the floor near the kitchen sink, and there was also a towel that was kind of wrapped up around that blood. It looked like somebody had probably used that to care or render aid to the victim. This particular firearm that was used in this incident was a shotgun, so it was actually shotgun shells that were in the residence. There were some alcohol containers, but a majority of the evidence that we were looking for, again, was that blood and ballistic evidence. Also, in the ceiling, we did see what appeared to be fabric that, in my opinion, had come from a piece of clothing or an article of clothing. So that was also significant in this case. In scenes like that, you have to be very careful not to step on the evidence, to get your other investigators out of there so that it's just you and you can really focus on the small, minute details. And in this particular instance, a lot of the evidence usually it's on the floor, it's on a couch. We actually had a lot of evidence. In this case, it was actually on the ceiling. So that's something that we had to be very cognizant of and document with with photos and video and things of that nature. The first thing that I noticed was the shot hole through the bathroom door. And when I saw that, I thought he was trying to kill whoever was inside of that bathroom. And at that time, I didn't know who that was, but that was pretty evident to me, because you go from shooting her to shooting yourself to shooting through the bathroom door. Those trajectories don't line up. It wasn't one shot made all of that damage. So that was probably the one thing that kind of triggered my interest right in the beginning. After seeing the shots in the ceiling and knowing where she was injured, I think that really opened my eyes to, wow, there's there was a lot going on here.
In Pottawatomie County, Iowa, investigators are beginning an investigation into the shooting of Patty Harker, a farm owner shot and seriously wounded in the early hours of June 17, 2011, at Minden, about half an hour northeast of Omaha, Nebraska. Police now have a chief suspect, a man called Craig Finney, who was previously in a relationship with Patty, but Craig Finney is nowhere to be found. Deputy teams spread out. One team visits Craig Finney's home, and his son Cody offers help in finding him.
Myself and other deputies were trying to figure out where Craig Finney, who he was a suspect, where he had gone.
I was initially contacted by an investigator who was with the son of Craig Finney. He apprised me of the situation and told me about the efforts that they were making to locate Mr. Finney. He told me about the different scenes that were involved. At that point, they knew of at least 3. They did not know where Craig Finney was. And he just apprised me of the situation and that they were basically on a manhunt to find him, and they were visiting different places that Cody Finney was assisting them in finding of where his father might be.
Cody is able to give police crucial information regarding Craig's movements straight after the shooting and takes them to his truck.
You could tell from the crime scene that he had gone back outside and had sort of laid in wait outside the window, which would have faced into the house toward the bathroom, and there's blood. He ultimately ends up getting back into his truck, assuming he knows that 911's on the way, or first responders are on the way. Craig's truck was pretty messed up as well. I mean, he was bleeding. It's left shoulder area, and so he's got blood all over his car seat, all over the side of his door, all over the side of his truck, where he'd leaned up against it. And so, I almost felt like probably the scene of where Craig drives away was almost more bloody, maybe, than the scene where Patty had been shot. So Craig heads to a pond. There's a friend of his that used to be an employer, and he has a very nice little, sort of rural pond area, and so you could fish and maybe swim, out there. And so he drives out to this pond. It's pretty close to Carson, Oakland area in Pottawatomie County, and calls his son, and so has his son come to pick him up. The phone call to his son was, meet me at the pond. I've shot myself. Don't believe at this time that his son was aware that he'd also shot, Patty. Just knows he shot himself. So, I think the son initially is thinking, what kind of bonehead thing did my dad do? Not thinking crime, more thinking accident, type of situation. And then shows up and sees that Craig is in, pretty bad shape. I think at that point, Craig confesses to him that he shot Patty. And so the son makes the decision that he's going to drive him from the pond that's owned by this friend to the friend's house himself. And this friend, this is somebody Craig used to work for, and I think close friends with over the past maybe 10 years. And Craig was aware that his friend was in the Ozarks. He had a cabin down in the Ozarks. That's about a 5-6 hour drive south from us. And so I think he knew he was gone, there. And so he goes to the farm where he knows his friend he has a Mercury Mountaineer in the shed, knows where he keeps the keys, and convinces his son to go back, says, oh, hey, I need you to get me my clothes or something in the truck. So could you go back to the pond and get some stuff for me? And so his son heads back to the pond. Craig then takes the keys to the Mountaineer and skedaddles out of town and starts heading south himself to the Ozarks.
That's what actually surprised me the most, though, is because when you saw at the scene, when he turned the gun on himself, I honestly don't know how he made it down to Missouri. When you're talking a 12-gauge shotgun that he shot himself with in the shoulder, and the amount of blood, that we had found in the vehicle and all the different locations. Making it down to Missouri with that type of wound, that's the biggest thing I think that I couldn't believe that he made it down there alive.
Back at Creighton University Medical Center, Patty Harker is in intensive care. She's able to give detectives some vital background information to her relationship with Craig Finney.
She's just, I say, best way I could describe Patty is just, hardworking salt of the earth. She just was tough, beautiful, just sort of a country girl. I think that's the best way, to put it. Worked hard, played hard. Worked, I think, at the time when all this is going on, worked at a place called Cyclone Cattle, which is just a cattle feedlot. I think that's where she met Craig. They'd been together for around 10 years, I think, and had broken up about a month, maybe a few weeks to a month before, this occurred. So Craig had he was sort of a plumber, plumbing business, also had some excavation equipment. Craig had done work at my place. I'd had a house in Carson, and he dug out a hill where we put a retaining wall in back probably in the 90s. As my understanding is that he sort of went out to her place to put in a new septic system. Obviously, when you live in the country, you're not hooked up to city sewer. We get used to, we turn the sink on, we flush our toilets, and it just goes away. That's not what happens when you live in the country. You have to have your own septic system, which stores and treats waste, on site. And, there's a special way that those have to be, installed. So they have to be licensed plumbers and septic system installers to do that. That's my understanding, is that Craig had gone out and done work at her place.
She said it was more of a friendship, but it was an intimate friendship, and she took a lot of responsibility for Craig's well-being and could see Craig as a person in need of a lot of care, and she was a caring person. And she gave a lot of herself to Craig. She focused on him a lot.
They also had a relationship that was pretty tumultuous, to put it lightly. They both, I think, they enjoyed partying, enjoyed hanging out, having fun. Problem was that Craig was very jealous and got violent when he was drinking, and I think that was sort of the history of their relationship as well. Is that maybe a year or two in, he started becoming a little violent with her, shoving her around. At one point, he made a fall. She was at the bar someplace. He was not. He was home. He wanted her to come home. Called her. She refused to come home. And so he called the police and explained that he basically made a false report against her, trying to get her arrested for drunk driving as she's leaving the bar. Just sort of this very possessive, and I've seen this, plenty of times in my career, but sort of this sort of possessive relationship. There's just a difference between obviously being partners and being property, and I think he was taking it more of the, he was very possessive, you were mine, didn't want her talking to other men.
Anytime she had any interaction with another male, he would become extremely jealous. And this was in good times and bad. They did both work at the same place. And so anytime she would even walk by another male employee, he would become upset and be jealous.
It was a violent history. Craig had assaulted Patty on several occasions, a few of which she had called the police concerning. He had actually pled guilty to one incident involving taking her hair and cutting it off, which also resulted in a laceration to her scalp and cutting off the tip of her index finger as she tried to shield her hair from the scissors. And that was in front of her 12-year-old son.
Patty also tells police what happened at the farm.
The first 2 times that we saw her, it was all handwritten. You couldn't understand a word she was saying. Her voice was so incredibly weak. We were just trying to get answers of, where she was earlier that night, if she invited Craig over or not, if she expected him to be coming over and things like that. She said that they had been at a work-related event after work, and she did see Craig there that night, and she gave Ben a ride home because he had been drinking. There was not an intimate relationship with her and Ben. I do remember her saying that, and that's about all that she was able to get out at that point. And as a female, you can't help but sit there and feel for her, knowing that, she could have taken a different route or what did she do to deserve this?
Crucially, Patty is able to give police an account of the night on the shooting.
She left work and she went to a bar. At that bar was a coworker that she had previously spent time with in the presence of Craig Finney. They had all been friends. It was their habit that whoever had drank the least would give the rides home. And on that night, it was Patty. She knew that the coworker had to work in the morning, so she offered the coworker a ride home. It was already 2 o'clock in the morning. His shift began at like 6 a.m., so the point of him going all the way home was a little pointless. So the plan was that he was going to sleep on the couch. She was going to sleep in her bed, wake up, and give him a ride to work the next morning. They had arrived at the house just long enough for the co-worker to take his boots off and get a glass of water. Craig Finney showed up at the door. She could clearly see him, and so could Ben, because there was a large 3 by 2 foot window in the door. There were 2 doors, one leading into a small foyer and then one leading into the kitchen. He had already walked through the door to the small foyer. When she saw him coming, she quickly locked the door to the kitchen. She threw her phone to her coworker and told him to lock himself in the bathroom, which he did. And he immediately called 911. Craig then entered the kitchen by forcing his way through that second door. The force through the door was determined both by Patty's version of events, that he forced his way through the door, which she had locked, and by evidence on the door jamb itself, which showed damage and a forceful entry.
My understanding is Patty's just trying to tell him, there's nothing going on. Why are you here? Basically, you shouldn't be here. We're done. Nothing's going on between Ben and I. Just get out of here. And he's having none of it. And so he goes back out to his truck, where he has a double-barreled 12-gauge, shotgun, which is just, it just holds 2 shells, one on the left, one on the right. And so he loads it, fills his pockets with shells as well, and then heads back in. My understanding is that he fires the round through the woodwork just to the left of the door where Ben is at. Ben, he knows Ben is in the bathroom. Probably saw him going in there. I mean, you can see through the windows and the door. That probably saw him go in and shut the door. So he fires around, sort of at Ben's general direction, then shoots Patty. Then he has to reload because he's only got 2 rounds, right? So he reloads, shoots himself, and I think he was just, this was going to be sort of what we see, right? Murder-suicide, and doesn't get the job done.
Crucially, Patty is able to give police an account of the night of the shooting.
Okay, stay on the line here with me. What are you hearing, sir? What are you hearing?
I don't hear anything right now. I heard 2 gunshots, but nobody's talking anymore.
You can hear, Patty as she's shot, and you'll hear her moaning. Then she starts to get quiet. Sort of the eeriest part of this is that Craig was coming back into the the place looking for Ben. I mean, you hear him say, "Ben, Ben."
He's coming back in. Ben, he's in here now.
Okay, was that Craig that was saying something?
Yes.
Okay.
It's an interesting process now for Ben as you hear the police are on the way. He's trying to talk to the 911 operator and says, basically, get here. They need to hurry up. She's dying. I can't just sit here, and not do anything.
I need the cops here.
I understand that, sir. They're on their way.
I need an ambulance.
The ambulance is on their way.
I need them.
Investigators are also able to collaborate Patty's version of events with the 911 call.
One of the people whose vehicle was taken by Craig, because Craig switched vehicles from the vehicle he used to arrive at Patty's house to the vehicle that he used to leave the state with. That vehicle was eventually reported stolen. The owner of the cabin that he went to down in Missouri was notified. The owner of the vehicle that he had taken was notified. And the owner of that vehicle had a hunch that he might be at that cabin. So he and his daughter went to that cabin. They saw the vehicle. And upon seeing the vehicle and knowing slight details about what had occurred, at least that there had been a shooting, that Patty had been shot, they did not approach. They called law enforcement. The Morgan County Sheriff's Department arrived. They set up a SWAT team and a perimeter, and they had intended to tap phone lines because they believed that Craig Finney was still armed and dangerous and homicidal and suicidal, and they did not end up having to deploy any of those tactics because Craig Finney, without knowing that they were there, came out of the residence for whatever reason, and they apprehended him outside without any resistance.
Approximately 29 hours after the shooting of Patty Harker, Craig Finney is arrested and taken into custody. Yet back in Creighton University Medical Center, Patty is growing weaker. Police investigating the shooting of Patty Harker, a farmer shot and seriously wounded in the early hours of June 17, 2011, in Minden, about half an hour northeast of Omaha, have tracked down their prime suspect, Craig Finney. He's been located and arrested by police in Missouri, and they soon come across a series of notes that confesses a motive for the shooting.
Well, the statement that I had made was that Craig Finney believed fully that he was going to die. He knew he was going to die a murderer, but he didn't want to die a liar. So he wrote a note to his children explaining that he loved them and his side of events. He wrote a note to the Council Bluffs Police Department where he said, "I am wanted for the murder of Patty Harker. This is what happened." He explained that he was in a rage at seeing Patty with another man, and that he could not stand seeing her with another man.
He ends up writing like on cocktail napkins and paper towels. He ends up writing pretty lengthy sort of confession about what happened. A note to his kids, notes to law enforcement. If you find my body, here's my name, my address, my birthday, my social security number. I mean, he's sort of doing all the things to sort of get his affairs in order, sort of explain why what happened.
He wrote a third note as to what he wanted done with his ashes to his oldest son, Cody, specifically that he wanted them buried at the pond that he had been at. Apparently that pond was a place of solitude for him. But he did not write a note to Patty's children. He did not write a note to Patty. He did not write a note that expressed sorrow for what he had done. It was more about, and he made this statement, "I will not die like a pig in a cage."
In reading those, it just made me realize what a selfish person that he was. It was about him, his injuries. I'm so injured. He was going to die. He wrote a note to his son. Really was never about Patricia. But I will say in those notes, he thought that she was dead. So he admits to shooting her. But again, he makes it all about him. It was never, "I'm so sorry I did this to her." It was more, poor me, I'm going to die. And the only reason this happened is because, because she was with this other man, and I can't live without her, essentially.
Patty, meanwhile, is in a critical condition in hospital.
Her blood pressure had dropped to 43/33, which is not consistent with life. Because of the low blood pressure, she had suffered a heart attack. Because of the blast effect of having a deer slug put through her back at a distance of 1 to 4 feet, she had percussion damage to all of her internal organs. Her heart had to be stitched back together. Her left lung was completely opaque on an x-ray because it had been shattered to bits. 4 of her ribs were commutated fractures, meaning pieces, and they all had to be removed. Her clavicle had to be removed. And her first surgery was 9.5 hours long, and she nearly died several times.
During his deposition, Craig Finney accepts a plea deal which surprises investigators.
I think when he realized how much he had hurt her, I think when he had to hear from her mouth about all the abuse and the things that she'd gone through, I think for him he was just like, "I'm done. I'm just going to take my medicine and agree to plead guilty to attempted murder." And I mean, that was for us pretty odd because it doesn't get any worse. I mean, you go to trial, it's not like the judge can say, "Well, now I'm really mad at you," and you get extra time. I mean, the sentence is the sentence. And so for him to just plead basically straight up to attempted murder, I think was pretty surprising to us. And like I said, it happened within 2 weeks. He said, he entered a plea, got sentenced exactly that same day, and headed off to the pen.
Craig pleads guilty to attempted murder, and on November 29, 2011, is sentenced to 25 years. Shockingly, County DA Christine Serco discovers Craig is corresponding with the woman he attempted to murder, Patty Harker.
He spent a short time in the jail pending the attempted murder prosecution. before his parents posted his $100,000 cash-only bond. During that period of time, he reached out to Patty, and she responded. I don't know what Patty's reasons were, because I did not discover that Patty was having any communication whatsoever with Craig, and her family brought in a stack of letters. And after I discovered that stack of letters, I reached out to the prison and asked them to examine the computer that he had been using and to look in his cell. And that's where it was discovered that he had been communicating with her through a pseudonym all along.
He's whining. He's doing a lot of, I'm poor me. I'm sitting in prison. I've got nothing to do. And she's having none of it, right? I mean, some of her letters are, you don't know what you've put me through. I mean, I'm on oxygen. I've lost a lung. I mean, I used to be able to go out and work. Now I walk with a walker. I'm on oxygen. Basically, like, don't give me your, poor me.
It's kind of strange, but I also think that when you've been in a relationship with someone for that long, it's probably difficult not to have some sort of connection to that person. And I think her knowing that he was behind bars, he couldn't hurt her anymore. So her communicating with him to her was probably innocent.
But Craig Finney is about to challenge the case in the system once again, this time appealing his plea and claiming he is innocent of the attempted murder of Patty Harker. By late 2011, Craig Finney is incarcerated in the Clarinda Correctional Facility, serving a 25-year sentence for the attempted murder of Patty Harker on June 17, 2011. Finney pled guilty. However, now incarcerated, he changes his mind and decides to challenge his guilty plea.
So, people plead guilty, and I close the file, and I move on to the next file in my office. We have a lot of work to do, and, my favorite is when somebody pleads guilty as charged, right? And I just move on with life. And within a couple of weeks of him entering his plea and being sentenced, he files an appeal. And he says, well, I think it's right, prison's not fun. I think he got off to, Oakdale as the inmate classification center. And I think he felt like, now I'm regretting my decision. And so he files an appeal arguing that there was not a sufficient factual basis for his plea. The judge has to decide not only are you pleading guilty, but are you actually guilty? And so he files an appeal and says that the judge at the district court level did not get sufficient facts from him to prove that he was actually guilty, and therefore they should set his conviction aside. And Court of Appeals agreed, and they reversed his conviction.
The offer that he received was quite generous, although acceptable. It was reasonable, although it was a concession of sorts. So when he changed his mind and decided that he wanted to have a trial, it was like taking a gift and giving it back, and it seemed like another act of selfishness by Craig Finney, because at that point he was willing to put Patty and her family through a trial, which is very difficult. Her deposition was very difficult, but he was willing to make her tell that story again, this time in front of a jury. And he wanted to have that opportunity to vindicate himself and not appear to be a bad person.
But Craig's decision backfires when tragically on April 25, 2013, Patty Harker dies. An autopsy confirms it is due to the gunshot injuries. On August 12, 2014, prosecutors bring more serious charges against him.
In the end, her body just could not handle it. She just, getting a lung, blown out. There's just no way. She already had a compromised, sort of lung system with the, COPD issues she's dealing with, and having the one lung, removed. She just couldn't keep going.
It was horribly sad. We kind of thought that, she had made it that many months, that she was in the clear and could maybe live a healthy life and move on. But clearly that didn't happen. Some complications kind of came about that she just couldn't overcome.
The crime of murder is completed when the person dies. I mean, because one of the elements is obviously that you caused the death of the person. And so had Patty died and then we accepted a plea to attempted murder, the crime of murder would already have been complete, and we would not have been able to charge him with murder because he's already entered a plea of guilty to attempted murder. But since he entered his plea and was sentenced on the attempted murder before she died, then the crime of murder still hasn't truly been completed yet. And so once she dies then, about a week or two, I believe, before the Supreme Court's decision reinstating his conviction came back. But since he had entered that plea and been sentenced before she died, then double jeopardy did not apply, and we felt comfortable going forward.
But we charged this as a first-degree murder case because we did believe that he intended to kill Patty that night because he knew that their relationship was over, and quite frankly, he had nothing to lose.
In August 2015, Craig Finney's trial for the first-degree murder of Patty Harker begins, and he decides to take the stand and give his version of events.
When he took the stand, some of his testimony was quite surprising. I knew that he was going to advance his version of events, that it was all just an accident, and the only reason he had a gun in the first place was just to convey his anger and seriousness of purpose. It was a scare tactic. He never intended to actually fire that gun.
The prosecution presents evidence proving Patty died as a result of being shot, and that Craig intended to cause fatal injury.
We really had to make sure that we could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the gunshot was a proximate cause of her death. We wanted to wait until the medical examiner had issued her findings, and she found manner of death homicide, which was obviously helpful to us.
We talked with the doctors to determine what her injuries were, and we looked at that murder weapon, and we tested that murder weapon extensively. We drop tested it, we jar tested it, and we made sure that there were mechanisms of safety on that weapon to ensure that the likelihood that that weapon could go off accidentally was nearly impossible. In fact, it was never recreated in the laboratory, with several attempts to do so.
Additional evidence collected at the scene of the crime also helps prove Craig's guilt.
I really think that the DNA evidence showing that both Craig and Patty's DNA was present in that kitchen in the form of blood, and again that ballistic evidence showing the trajectories of the shot that hit Patty, the shot that he used to inflict his own injury, and then again that shot at Ben in the bathroom. That just showed that he didn't just do it once. He shot 3 separate times. That showed his intent. That showed what he wanted to do that night and what he came there to do. We tested several swabs and several pieces of clothing for DNA evidence. We did find several areas, which was not surprising, of both the defendant and the victim's DNA. Probably what was most significant was the defendant's DNA was located in a grass area outside of the bathroom window. And the reason that is significant is because Patricia's friend, Ben, was actually hiding in the bathroom, afraid for his life. And that blood, I knew that Craig was outside watching him, hoping that he would come out so that he could possibly injure him as well. And so it was very significant that that blood came back to Craig Finney.
So I did something that I'm really not supposed to do according to my training. And I took the chance of asking him an open-ended question, not knowing what he might say. One of the last questions I asked him was, "You shot Patty. She died. What exactly is your defense?" And he paused. He looked at the floor. He looked at his lawyers. And then he finally said, "I could not control my rage."
He certainly felt a very strong emotional connection to Patty, and I think he certainly understood he was responsible for her no longer being on the earth. And that, I do believe that truly, that he felt that.
The jury deliberate and soon return with their verdict.
So the jury came back and ultimately found him guilty of second-degree murder. So they did not believe that he had sufficient time to premeditate and think about what he was doing. They didn't buy this is an impulse killing due to provocation, which we obviously were grateful for, but they found him guilty of second-degree murder. And so he was ultimately sentenced to 50 years in prison with a 35-year mandatory minimum. So I believe his tentative release date is something like 2046, when he'll be like 85 or 86 years old.
I felt that the verdict was reasonable, even though I did feel that the evidence in the case justified first-degree murder.
Prosecutors are relieved that Craig is behind bars and justice is served.
I was happy. I think at Craig's age, second-degree murder charge, he will never get out of prison, and I think that's ultimately what we wanted. We wanted to lock him up for all of the years that he had abused her, and he deserved to be locked up.
This time, Craig did take his medicine. He got convicted of second-degree murder, didn't file an appeal. I think that is the only murder case I can think of where a person was found guilty at trial that I did not then have to deal with an appeal afterwards. And I think that he felt like he got to say his piece, and Patty definitely got to say her piece, and I think that he was finally willing to just accept responsibility for it. So, can you ever have closure when your mother, if you're a kid, and your mom, even if you're an adult, and your mom has been, violently killed? I don't know that closure ever exists. But I do believe that we got some justice for Patty, and I feel like the fact that I'm not having to deal with yearly updates, like this is how the appeals are going, or the post-conviction relief petitions, or all of that, just the fact that he's been sort of able to just go away, and they've been able to, rebuild their lives. Two of the twins, her sons, both became Pottawatomie County deputy sheriffs. They work now in law enforcement. I think that's pretty powerful, and I think a lot of that probably has to do with honoring their mom.
September 2012, Gainesville, Florida. A Florida University student, Christian Aguilar, is missing.
Trying to figure out what's going on. You're trying to figure out who's involved, why they're involved. And in a case like this, there were so many different twists and turns.
All people of this age have an extreme digital signature. And what we were able to see with Christian Aguilar is that by about 5:30, his digital signature just disappeared.
Investigators soon suspect foul play may be involved.
Someone comes in and is talking about hitchhikers and duct tape and love triangles and missing persons, that you're going to need to start looking under the cover.
He was acting so suspiciously during his interrogation that the police realized that this guy has walked right into the police station and is basically saying that he did it.
They initially came in to talk about a missing person in a love triangle where 2/3 of the love triangle are in the building, but the other third is the one that's missing.
Police uncover a meticulously planned and brutal murder.
This is a very clearly premeditated murder. This thing was thought out months in advance.
This is the tragic story of Christian Aguilar, the disturbing mind of his killer, and how a close friendship ends in murder.
This is a real case of jealousy.
He was jealous of the life that he had. He was jealous of the opportunities that he had. He was going to make sure that Christian could not have those opportunities anymore.
November 16th, 1993. A baby boy, Christian Aguilar, is born to adoring parents, Carlos and Claudia Aguilar, in Miami, Florida.
Christian changed my life. I always wanted to be a father, but I think Christian was a gift. He likes to read a lot. His humor is like mine. He makes us laugh so much, but he didn't want to do it in public. But in private, in the family, with friends, he was so hilarious. He can make jokes out of nowhere. For me, he was the best brother that I can see for Alexander. And I think Alexander always looked up to Christian. We, like a normal family, we spent together so much time over the weekends doing activities with them that we forgot about the rest of the world. And that's the truth. And it was not because we were not compassionate or nothing like that. It's just that that's life. We didn't have a lot, but we have enough. And enough was good for us.
For high school, Christian attends Doral Academy and quickly becomes friends with fellow classmates Erica Freeman and Pedro Bravo.
Erica was always an excellent student. She was like the president of the reading club, and Christian was always around those type of people. I think Pedro Bravo also was an excellent student. We know that they were all in a group of excellent individuals. They were going to make it really good in a school. Everybody was going for their goals in class and to the university, and they wanted to pursue careers. They have these dreams about going to the university, and that was the main theme between them. The three of them were extremely focused on getting their career achievements, and they were doing similar activities that bonded together.
Erica and Pedro start dating in high school, but Erica ends the relationship when they finish, as she's attending college in Gainesville, over 300 miles away.
Erica Freeman knows that she's not staying in Miami. She's going to come to Santa Fe and then go on to the University of Florida. That's her plan. She's been dating Pedro Bravo for a couple of years in high school. And it's been a rocky relationship, tumultuous at times relationship. So she decides that she's going to break up with him. That does not go well. It's very difficult. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of outbursts by Mr. Bravo about the ending of their relationship. And she makes a decision that she's really going to have a clean cut. She does that, and she cuts off communication with him. And that, in her mind, is sort of the end of the relationship, and she's moving on.
You usually remain Facebook friends with your ex unless it's a pretty dramatic break. And that's what happened here. Losing that Facebook connection clearly sent Pedro over the edge. He has a diary entry talking about how terrible it was. I feel a piece of my world ending already, though now begins my journey to win her back.
Unbeknownst to Pedro, Erica and Christian begin a relationship when they start at the University of Florida and Santa Fe College.
They moved at the same time to Gainesville, and they start sharing more things over there because they were new in that city. A month later, he told me that he was very interested in having a relationship with Erica.
In our culture, we see it in a different way, and that for us, if that person was a good friend morally, we never will look at his girlfriend, wife, or anybody to start a relationship with. I told him that it can have consequences. I was concerned. We already knew that Pedro was having psychological issues.
Who is Pedro Bravo?
He was certainly a charming guy. He was considered a class clown at the high school. He had a long-term relationship with a girl for 3 years. So he certainly had the ability, it seems, to portray himself as a nice, happy-go-lucky, fun guy. He also was talented in a lot of ways. You look at his art. Beautiful artwork. Ignoring the content for a second, the beautiful imagery, it's remarkable talent. So he had a lot of talent. A lot of folks go through a terrible breakup when they're in high school, around the same time that Pedro did. His girlfriend's going off to college, and he's staying home at college. It's a pretty normal story. Those two people are kind of are moving away from each other, and his girlfriend decided he didn't want to be with him anymore. And Pedro did not take that well, very clearly. And it's obvious that over the course of that summer, he descended mentally very, very fast.
Pedro starts obsessing about Erica and how he can get the relationship back on track.
He has sort of a master plan of how he's going to get her back in his life. It's actually written in his diary that he has sort of planned all this out on how he was going to show up in Gainesville, very carefully, very slowly reinitiate contact with her. He wasn't going to pressure her. He was going to try to win her into a friendship. Once he got her into a friendship, then he was going to try to turn that friendship back to a romance, by showing her how much he loved her and how much he cared about her. Eventually, he shows up in August, but in the late August, early September, he makes contact with Erica, and he says, "I'm here," and he kind of reveals himself to her, why he's doing what he's doing.
But Erica isn't happy, and although she tries to protect him by not posting on social media, Pedro finds out she is dating Christian.
Erica realized that when she broke up with Pedro, that he was not handling this well. And she did not want him to know about any relationship with Chris. So anything that was out there, she was trying to keep it from being in the public eye. Chris, on the other hand, was very happy about his relationship with Erica. And it's not that he didn't care about Pedro. He did. It was just that, in his mind, I think, that relationship was over. Christian Aguilar's ex-girlfriend has Christian Aguilar's Facebook password. They share that password with Pedro, and once he gets into Christian's Facebook account, he can see that Erica's not telling him the truth. That there are photographs from that Facebook account that were private that showed Erica and Chris in bed together, not unclothed, but certainly in a manner which no two people would be together unless they were in a relationship.
Crushed and feeling betrayed, Pedro threatens suicide, and Erica meets up with him.
There were two meetings between Erica and Pedro. The first was after Pedro texted her and told her that he was going to kill himself or hurt himself, and she met with him on Hull Road at the University of Florida in a bus shelter. She found him there. Her friends waited for her. It was about a 45-minute conversation where she told him, "I'm not going to have a relationship with you again." The next meeting was at Santa Fe, where they were both students. They agreed to meet at a bench in front of the Santa Fe Zoo, and he presented to her a lot of artwork that he had done, where he's an exceptionally good artist, that he had created for her to show his love, and she once again told him, "I'm not going to be in a relationship with you."
But Pedro is not going to be deterred.
Chris just can't exist anymore. He can't be part of this picture, because this is going to stop every plan that he has made throughout this entire summer to get her back.
September 2012. 18-year-old Pedro Bravo has just discovered his ex-girlfriend, Erica Freeman, is dating his close best friend, Christian Aguilar. Feeling betrayed, Pedro asks Christian to meet up.
There are only three people who know what's going on. It's Erica, Pedro, and Chris. Chris has put off Pedro once because of a test to meet, and the only three people who know that they're going to meet are those three. So the timeline of events here is that he leaves to go meet with Pedro at 2 o'clock, 2:30, something of that nature. Erica expects him back at her apartment to study and hang out at 4:35. So Erica is, by 9 o'clock, she's in full freak out. But by 4 o'clock in the morning, when he hasn't turned up, she's lost it. She's trying constantly. She knows who he's with, and she has no idea what Pedro knows at that moment. She doesn't know that they're in a relationship. So she doesn't really have a reason to be concerned. She's trying, after 7, 8 o'clock, she's trying to get in touch with Pedro to say, "Where's Chris? Where did you leave Chris?" But he's not answering the phone. Their first conversation is about 4:40 in the morning, something like that. The first time that they will meet up that day is at the Gainesville Police Department. They get to the Gainesville Police Department, they speak with someone there who gets a lay of the land of what's happening. This is a University of Florida student who resides on the University of Florida campus. The Gainesville Police Department says this is most likely within the jurisdiction of the University of Florida Police Department, and they direct them to go to the University of Florida Police Department. So they travel to the University of Florida Police Department in separate vehicles and show up there. A police officer asks them some questions, the first one being, who are all of you people? And Erica says, I'm Erica. This is my ex-boyfriend, Pedro Bravo, and the person who's missing is my current boyfriend, Christian Aguilar.
Police take statements from both Erica and Pedro. Pedro's behavior raises suspicion.
Pedro Bravo says Christian's fine. I dropped him off at the end of our day, and as far as I know, he's in fine health and condition.
One fatal flaw from Pedro in speaking to police was that he referred to Christian in the past tense, and he did it a few times.
Pedro Bravo had said that they were having a disagreement and an argument and a fist fight of some sort. And he says, I let him out of the car. And he walks out of the car. Pedro Bravo says to Randy Roberts, if I take you to where I let him out of the car, if I take you to the point of this mythical fight that I say we're having, can I go home with my parents tonight? And at that point, Randy Roberts stops him and says, I need you to turn around and read what's on the wall behind you. Because on the wall behind him is the Miranda rights. So Pedro Bravo does waive Miranda and does agree to continue speaking with law enforcement. And this interview is going to continue on for another probably 6-7 hours beyond the point of the first 2 or 3, which were a missing persons investigation. He does take law enforcement out to an area north of town on 441 near what was Strite's Honda. And he takes them there and says, this is where Christian Aguilar and I had some disagreement.
Pushed him once he stumbled back, tripped him, got on top of him with my knees, like the bruises from the climbing, but got on top of him with my knees. And at that point, I got my entire hand I did one slam to the face, because he already had the wrist from those, but I just one slam to the face, like below the upper lip. Like below the nose and the upper lip, like it hit him there. And after that, it's 1 or 2 punches, not too many. Like I didn't continue to go beating on him with punches and punches and punches.
And at this point, we have a very active manhunt. The search for Christian Aguilar at this point is now very much in play.
The search started very small with Carlos and with a few officers walking in the woods. We blinked, and there were volunteers pouring in all over the place, literal buses coming into Gainesville, pulling into the command center.
In the immediate aftermath of Christian's disappearance, there was a galvanizing effect in South Florida, in Gainesville, and in parts of Columbia where his family was from. So people were coming from all around to that area to aid in the search of Christian. There were students from University of Florida, students from Santa Fe College, students from his high school, young people and older folks from all around who aided authorities in trying to find Christian.
Carlos was out there walking, so we were out there walking right behind him, right alongside with him. That grew and grew and grew. The more people that began to talk about it, the more people that began to listen about it, you could see the crowds grow and grow and grow. We had a good problem. We had thousands of searchers, but we didn't know where to look.
Investigators continue interviewing Pedro, and his story keeps changing.
When we talked earlier and we went over this, you said y'all met at the hub.
Yes.
At 2 o'clock.
2:30.
Yeah, we went through this whole scenario of stuff, and I talked to you about the McDonald's at 1:30, 1 o'clock in the morning or something, and found out that you hadn't been truthful with me about that part.
Yes.
And a couple other things, and that you actually didn't know what happened to him and where he was and all this. And at some point, you punched him in the face.
Yes.
Put your hands up like this for me. I've been doing this for a really long time, and have to do it for another 10 years. 30 years of doing this, and those don't look like the hands of somebody that beat somebody up. If it didn't happen exactly like that, if you put him somewhere else, or you did something else to him, are you worried about being in more trouble or something? Is that the reason you wouldn't tell me the truth about finding him, or?
I'm already in this much trouble.
But I want to find him.
I understand. But I'm telling you the truth. This is it. You could look around if you want, but you're not going to find him. I didn't do anything like that to him.
Police start examining Pedro's car and phone and uncover evidence that confirms he is lying.
They've searched his car consensually. They took his cell phone, again, consensually, from the electronic signature of his cell phone, pinging off of towers across Gainesville. We know that he drives north, and then he drives east in a sort of convoluted long trip around Gainesville. None of this is in the direction of anything he's ever really gone to or dealt with in Gainesville. It's not in the direction of his apartment or anything like that. As they start piecing together the cell phone data that shows where he was, they start confronting him with more and more information that's inconsistent with what he's saying.
Oh, my phone was off with power and I turned it off because it had 10% battery life.
What time did you turn your phone back on?
My phone back on
To your best recollection.
at around 1 o'clock when I went to McDonald's or so.
No.
Yes.
Try 4:15. Do you see how it says not available, not available, not available, not available, and then at 4:13:35 you turn the phone back on. So at 4:13 in the morning and 35 seconds you turn the phone back on. No. What I'm talking about is at 4:03 you're up here. All right. Your phone's down here at 5:59. So that tells us that you're right in this area for 2 hours. What we want to know is what's going on during those 2 hours.
Well, me and Chris were talking.
We're finding out new stuff that you haven't talked to me about before. You picked up a hitchhiker, according to you.
Yes, correct.
One of the first stories that he gives is the story of the hitchhiker, which he describes as someone who appears to be like a homeless Santa Claus. Someone who is older, has a long white beard, long white hair. He gives very, very in-depth detail as to his clothing. He says what his shoes look like. So he's saying that he's standing on the heels of his shoe. He picks him up and they drive him all the way to the other end of town and leave him by a storage facility. And that shortly thereafter, this is when Chris gets out of the car. When it came to what happened to Chris, Pedro Bravo was unable to give any explanation. He was unable to give any detail. Where did he get out of the car? Why did he get out of the car? What was he doing when he got out of the car? What was his condition when he got out of the car? He didn't have answers for any of those things. What was he wearing? He didn't remember what Chris is wearing, but he was able to describe the shoes and how they were worn by homeless Santa Claus.
And you took him, dropped him off at the storage facility.
Correct. You can verify this.
That was earlier.
That was earlier, yes.
Back about the time that you got there, for something in the afternoon. But you were in that area for 2 hours. Where were you for 2 hours?
At that place, Walmart.
What were you doing there?
I was just talking with Chris.
So why didn't you tell me this earlier?
Because it was a little chat. It wasn't that much. Like we were just reflecting on little things. It wasn't
Walmart?
At the Walmart, yes.
Why did you leave out the part about sitting in the parking lot at Walmart for 2 hours?
Because we were just sitting there for a while, just talking. It was just something small me and him did. We were just talking there for a bit.
I know, but what we're talking about.
I know. I understand. Yeah.
No detail is too small.
I understand.
You know, when the three of us were in a car earlier, you said it wasn't this far, and you had us turn around, and you said we were coming this way. You said we were coming south.
It was that same area. I remember coming south, yes.
So you said we were coming south.
Yes.
Now you're telling me you were headed north, towards 53rd.
Pedro continues to add details originally missing from his initial story about their argument.
He's really angry at the moment because he's not only shocked that like I punched him in the face, but he's kind of like off at me for punching him in the face, as I would expect. So he just gets out of the car like he's gonna get out, and then
But he's ridden for a half a mile without doing anything about it. So I'm gonna reach around like this, and punch somebody in the face hard enough that he's gonna sit there and take it for a half a mile and be stunned back. Like you're telling me he's stunned back. Okay. I think I have a better understanding if you're telling us the truth. Okay. I think the issue that we run into here, though, is every single time that we find something out and find out you're not telling us the truth, you have a whole new story.
After hearing Pedro talk them through multiple accounts that conflict with one another, police confront Pedro about Christian's true status and arrest him for the suspected murder of Christian Aguilar.
There's a very powerful moment between Gainesville Police Department Detective Randy Roberts and Pedro Bravo, where he says, "Now, Pedro, you and I both know we're not going to find Christian Aguilar, or you and I both know that Christian Aguilar is not coming home. You and I both know that he's dead." Initially, they were going to hold him on some sort of charge of battery, aggravated battery, because he admitted at some point in the investigation that I had punched him, and then eventually he admits a little more. I punched him and he was bleeding in the back seat. They had enough to hold him for some sort of battery or aggravated battery, but not anything like kidnapping or murder. But as the day developed and sort of went further and further and further into the interviews, ultimately it went from missing person to aggravated battery to murder.
With Pedro arrested, investigators continue the search for Christian Aguilar's remains and try to get the location out of Pedro, who is still pleading his innocence.
Hello, this is a free call from
Pedro Bravo,
an inmate at
the Alachua County Department of the Jail.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
I told you we got into a fight.
Why didn't he defend himself?
He did. He was trying to push me off him.
Why don't you have any marks or anything?
Any marks?
Marks or anything. I haven't seen you, but his family says in the courtroom you didn't have any signs of anything on your hand. I don't see anything. No scratch.
Because I told the police one side, and then I told them that I got into a fight because I didn't want to leave that out. And now the police are saying...
In the beginning.
Because I was scared, Erica.
Listen, you never lie to the police. You're smart.
Why do you think I told them that? Because I didn't want to lie to the police.
With Pedro in custody, the search for Christian continues for weeks. But tragically, and to the distress of his family and the volunteers searching for him for 22 days, the remains of Christian Aguilar are found on October 15th, 2012.
To some degree, this is a search to see within the first day or two, maybe the first 48 hours, it was a search to see if Christian could be found alive. Beyond 48 hours, probably the statistics would tell us, we're not looking for a live body, but we're looking for remains.
The most difficult part of that information is that we literally had thousands of volunteers that came from Miami, that came from Florida, all sorts of places in Florida and around. And to tell those people, look, we're not searching for Christian alive anymore.
People continued to go out and to find him. His father believed he was alive, and unfortunately they did find him, but he was found deceased.
22 days after he was reported missing, Christian Aguilar's remains are discovered. But will they reveal how he died? October 15th, 2012. The remains of Christian Aguilar are discovered in a remote woodland in North Florida. It is suspected that the 18-year-old was murdered by his friend, Pedro Bravo, and investigators are hoping the autopsy will yield information on how he died.
The body was discovered 23 feet away from the dirt road in this very remote part of Levy County. And 23 feet away is actually consistent with what a lot of experts say. That's about as far as somebody wants to drag a body before it either gets too cumbersome or it gets too like psychologically strange for them. It's about as far enough away from the road where you feel like it's concealed, but it's also not so far that you have to be dragging this body for a long period of time.
The university's entomology department was made available to us. They went to the site of the burial while the exhumation was going on, captured the insects that were in the area of the body. They then went to the autopsy and captured the insects that were on the remains of Christian Aguilar. And from that, they were able to determine when that body was placed in that grave within about a 24-hour period, which matched perfectly with when Christian went missing. When they find Chris, he's bound at his wrists, at his mouth, and at his ankles with duct tape.
With little arising from the autopsy, investigators start compiling circumstantial evidence to strengthen their case.
Every business along the routes that they drove, they're getting surveillance films for the streets. You know, any stoplights or anything that had surveillance, any of the businesses that had surveillance, whether it was Zaxby's or Best Buy or Walmart, law enforcement was getting that material together. They were doing really good work with the computers and cell phones that were involved in the case. Those investigations sort of culminated within the next couple of months.
Trawling the CCTV footage, the level of planning that went into the murder becomes evident.
A few days before the date of the murder, he goes to the local Walmart. He buys what we described as sort of the murderer's starter pack. He buys ZzzQuil, which has diphenhydramine in it. He buys a couple bottles of Gatorade that he's ultimately going to put the diphenhydramine in. He buys a knife, like a hunting knife. He buys duct tape. He uses cash to make all these purchases. He gets cash back so that his parents aren't going to see these transactions on his credit card or anything like that. And of course, he thinks that ultimately, if it comes down to it, law enforcement won't see these transactions. He goes immediately next door at our local Walmart to Lowe's, where he buys a standard shovel. At this point, he doesn't have a car. After one of his conversations with Erica, where she says, I'm not going to be with you, he ends up driving kind of distracted and driving angry, and he damages his car fairly significantly. He runs the wheels of his car into some sort of curb or barrier, and he damages the tires on his car. Ultimately, on the day of the murder, we're able to identify and track his vehicle around Gainesville in surveillance video. GPD does a remarkable job with that part of the investigation, but we're aided in the fact that he never paid to replace the hubcap that was damaged in that crash. So his car, as it's driving around Gainesville, is hubcapless on one wheel. He was driving a blue SUV, which would not be terribly uncommon vehicle, but a blue SUV missing, I think it was the rear hubcap, becomes very easy for law enforcement to identify as he's moving around town.
The duct tape forms a chain that leads to you being the killer. So he had a roll of duct tape in his car. The University of Florida Police Department searches his car. They find this roll of duct tape. On his car, he has a cracked windshield. And on the windshield, he's put a piece of duct tape. They take the duct tape off his car and they take it into evidence. All of that duct tape goes to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and they are able to get it all unstuck and get it all back together, matching each edge from the roll to the window, to his feet, to his hands, to his neck.
Whoever duct taped that windshield also duct taped that body. And we know it's from the same roll.
As they are piecing the evidence together, investigators receive crucial information from an unlikely source.
You know, in the theme of Pedro thinking he was the smartest guy in the room, which he obviously was not, he spent about a month with a guy named Michelangelo in the Alachua County Jail. And it was like Pedro wanted us to know exactly what he did.
His lawyer, a woman by the name of Margaret Stack, had in her possession a letter that was written by Pedro Bravo that outlined a ruse in order to fool law enforcement into believing that there was a serial killer who was still on the loose, who targeted young University of Florida male students. So he believed, Pedro Bravo believed, that Michelangelo was a gang member who had the resources and ability to cause essentially a series of serial murders. And also what he had done is he had drawn a map for Michelangelo showing where he had left the shovel that was used to bury Christian Aguilar. And we went out to Spyglass Apartments, which is an apartment complex. It's the apartment complex where Pedro Bravo was living at the time. There are many, many boardwalks in Spyglass, and we looked pretty much every single one of them, and there was one more boardwalk. I looked at it, and I thought, yeah, it can't possibly be there. So I walk over there, I look underneath it, and there's a shovel.
Of course, now we have the shovel. Now we have the body. We have the gravesite. And we have the car. And through those four things, we're able to look at the same types of soil sediment on the bottom, the undercarriage of the car, the shovel, the body itself, and the gravesite. And what's remarkable about that location, being near the coast, Levy County, it had it had very high concentrations of a chemical called goethite. Alachua County is almost goethite free. Levy County has a lot of goethite. And so when Pedro Bravo was making statements about, I used this shovel, but I only dug around my apartment for lichen or for moss or for things to use in artistic displays, that was completely inconsistent with the dirt that's on the shovel. The dirt on the shovel is replete with goethite. And Alachua County has no goethite.
It was the same shovel that you could see him buying at Lowe's. You could even see where it was still so new that the shovel had originally come with a sticker on it that had its UPC code and the advertising for it. And you could still see that there was sand stuck to where the sticker had been.
While we learn of all the facts of the murder in terms of how the murder occurred within the Walmart parking lot, we learn of all those facts through Michelangelo's retelling because it's what Pedro Bravo told him. And even if we might shake our head and say, well, do we believe a 9-time convicted felon who's facing life imprisonment? Because he knew where the shovel was, the answer is yes. Because the only person who knew where that shovel was the person who committed that murder. And it wasn't Michelangelo, because he was in jail on September 20th, 2012. So he didn't commit the murder. So he either committed the murder or he talked to the person who committed the murder.
From Michelangelo's statement and all the evidence compiled, investigators now believe they can piece together the malicious events of September 20th, 2012. By 2014, Gainesville police accumulate enough evidence to piece together how 18-year-old Christian Aguilar was killed by Pedro Bravo in September 2012.
Chris and Pedro were friends, and ultimately Pedro plays on this friendship in order to convince Christian to meet with him. The way he gets him alone is he says, I really need to talk to you. I'm thinking about harming myself. I'm thinking about killing myself. You're my friend. We've been friends forever. So he uses that friendship to get Chris to meet with him. Chris doesn't want to meet with him. Chris has no interest in this. There's no time for it. He's very busy. He doesn't want to do this.
And he knows that it needs to be sort of in a public place. It needs to be in a place that's not going to be, scary or off-putting to Christian Aguilar. They agree to meet at the Hub, which is the local campus student union. It's a place that would be very well known to Christian Aguilar, and Christian Aguilar suggests it. They go from the Hub to the local Best Buy, where they buy a CD. And the importance of that is, we see his cell phone and how good the cell phone is at tracking him. Because we can see their entire day as they went from the Hub to Best Buy. They went across the parking lot to Zaxby's for lunch. And all these things are kind of exactly as Pedro described how he wanted to do it. He was going to meet him on campus, get him off campus, suggest lunch places off campus that weren't available on campus. like Zaxby's, so that he could try to get Christian Aguilar alone. He needed him alone for a period of time, but he needed him alone in a place where Christian Aguilar wouldn't be fearful. They parked in the parking lot at the Walmart, and it's there that they stop, and presumably they're going to talk for a moment, because ultimately the car is parked at the Walmart for about 2 hours or more, and doesn't move. No one gets in or out of the vehicle. The vehicle never moves. And it's just still for 2 hours. And in that time frame, clearly, Pedro Bravo probably administers the Gatorade that he had put the sleeping pills into. That's probably provided to Christian Aguilar. It probably puts Christian Aguilar into a sleepy state. And then using some sort of reason to get into the back seat, Pedro Bravo moves from the driver's seat to the back seat, and using what we believe to be some sort of tire strap or moving strap, he reaches to the front seat and strangles Christian Aguilar. Pedro Bravo tells an inmate that he's housed with, it took about 13 minutes, he says, for Christian to die. Christian obviously struggles. He reaches for the door. He scratches the ceiling, but it's too great to escape. Ultimately, Pedro Bravo buries Christian Aguilar face down in a shallow grave in a manner that the Human Identification Lab would call an enemy burial. Even though he's in airplane mode on his cell phone, the internal workings of the cell phone record what the cell phone is doing. So GPS isn't telling anything of where the cell phone is, but the cell phone itself knows what it's doing. And during that period, we see a dramatic drop for 48 minutes of his battery. His battery goes from very well charged to a fractional amount of the battery very quickly over 48 minutes. And the investigators are very keen to point out that that's the use of the flashlight app. He couldn't use the headlights on his vehicle because he's in a private hunting camp in the middle of the night burying a dead body. So your headlights aren't an option. But his flashlight app was all the light he could use, and it appears that for 48 minutes, that's exactly what he did.
Pedro Bravo's trial finally begins in 2014, and with the mountain of evidence compiled against him, the defense are facing an uphill battle.
I think the defense had a very difficult time in defending their client. And that's because there was a lot of evidence, a lot of physical evidence. There was a lot of visual evidence. You had cameras all about Gainesville, seeing these two guys hanging out with each other up until the minute that Christian went missing.
When Pedro took the stand, I was wondering what in the world was he doing? How in the world could he explain his way out of this? And what struck me was the absolute deadness in his eyes. I made eye contact with him, and it was the most unique experience I've ever had. It was just black and dark, and there was nothing behind his eyes.
I stopped crossing him because there was no point. It was such an incredible lie that no one was believing it. No one in the courtroom believed it. The jury didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. My co-counsel didn't believe it. I don't think his counsel believed it.
Following the trial, it isn't long before the jury comes to a verdict.
This was a relatively fast verdict. I would say probably inside of 2 hours. But the evidence here was overwhelming. It would not have taken a jury long, I wouldn't have suspected, to find that he was guilty. And of course they did. They found him guilty of all counts. They found him guilty as charged, including, most importantly, premeditated first-degree murder. Florida law only allows for one sentence for premeditated first-degree murder, and that is a sentence of life without parole. So he will, remain in prison for the rest of his natural life.
What was the driving factor that led to such a horrific murder?
I think that this is a case of two forces interacting at the same time. One is a mental health illness, and two is jealousy and romance gone awry. And when those things hit each other, terrible, terrible things take place. And that's what we saw here.
I firmly believe that Pedro Bravo was absolutely jealous of Christian Aguilar. He was jealous of the life that he had. He was jealous of the opportunities that he had. And if Pedro could not have those opportunities, he was going to make sure that Christian couldn't have those opportunities anymore.
With Pedro Bravo behind bars for the rest of his life, Christian Aguilar's family tried to come to terms with the death and honor him.
Christian was interested in and graduating from biochemical engineering. You know, when he was killed by Pedro, those dreams stopped. It was very honored for us that the UF, months after Christian passed away, brought us to Gainesville to give us the recognition that he was graduated from biotechnical engineer. So he's a post-mortem engineer, and is the first one in the Latin culture to receive that. These tragedies do happen, and that we are not doing enough. The authorities don't have the capacity to look for every single person. We think that everything that is happening outside of your environment is not going to happen to you. The bad things don't happen to good people, and unfortunately that's life.